Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Friday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have bad, and crazy martinis again today. Jim, we said at the end of the Thursday edition that it's been a very bumpy week and that we feared Friday would kind of be the same way. It is. It is definitely. And for the third time this week, we're talking about Donald Trump on immigration. Not to beat a dead horse, we just have different immigration positions to evaluate every time, and today is no different. So
he's the Ryan Lochte. Every time you think the story's done, there's some new twist, some new reversal. Wait, everything you know is wrong. It's exactly the opposite. So.
All right. Well, just in case some folks weren't with us, let's hop in the way back machine all the way to yesterday. In response to Hannity on Wednesday night when Trump said this about how he's perhaps softening on what to do about the illegals who are currently in the country and have not broken the law other than coming into the country illegally.
And I've had very strong people come up to me, really great people come up to me, and they've said, Mr. Trump, I love you. But to take a person that's been here for 15 or 20 years and throw them and the family out, it's so tough, Mr. Trump. I mean, I have it all the time.
Take them and throw them out. It's just so tough, Mr. Trump. Well, Trump was speaking with Anderson Cooper on CNN Thursday night, and now this is the story.
What's going to happen? We're going to deport many people, many people.
The vast majority of those 11 million are not
But
criminals.
we don't know that. We're going to find
crimes.
out who they are. We have crime all over this country.
If they haven't committed a crime, is there going to be a path to legalization?
First thing we're going
I'm talking
to
about
do.
citizenship.
No, there's not a path. There is no path to legalization.
You talked about paying back
Unless
taxes
people
on Hannity.
leave the country, when they come back in, if they come back in, then they can start paying taxes.
So they still have to
leave the
leave
country.
the
But there is no path to legalization unless they leave the country and come back.
So now they got to leave the country and come back. Then they can be legal and pay taxes. And then he said this.
So if you haven't committed a crime and you've been here for 15 years and you have a family here, you have a job here, will you be deported?
We're going to see what happens once we strengthen up our border. We're going to have a strong border, as strong as any border there is anywhere in the world. We're going to have a real wall. We're going to have tremendous protection, both technological protection and everything else. And then we're going to see what happens. But there is a very good chance the answer could be yes. We're going to see what happens.
The answer could be yes, and I guess it could be no. So, Jim, can Trump just not make up his mind here, or does he not know what he's talking about?
I'm fascinated to watch the Trump defenders who will insist he's totally not changed his position. And I guess if you're in a position of maybe, there's sufficient unknown. You know, his position is now Schrodinger's cat. He will simultaneously deport and not deport all of the illegal immigrants at the same time. Look, back in November, he talked about deportation force, and there was no ifs, ands, or buts. There was no conditional. There was no, this is something I'm thinking about, but I'm just not sure. No, it was pretty much going to happen. Then he goes to Hannity, and he makes like, oh, it's such a Megillah. It's such a pain. And then we talked yesterday about the applausometer.
Yes.
You know, if the needle moves far enough, that'll determine what his position's going to be. So finally, feeling that, knowing that he's gotten himself in trouble on this, and Ann Coulter's upset, and all these other folks are saying, well, wait, this is a complete reversal, and Jeb Bush, of all people, is getting to do a touchdown dance. Then all of a sudden, Trump comes out and clarifies things by saying, maybe. We'll see where we are. Well, if you think it's a really good idea, do you vote for him and you hope for it? The hope that he goes through with it? If you think it's a really bad idea, do you vote for him and hope that he doesn't? My suspicion is, and I wrote about this in the Morning Jolt, is that just when Trump talks about these things, it's not hard to hear contradictions, and he's not clear. One moment he's talking about some of this is on Anderson Cooper's part, by the way. Like, it'd be nice to say, will there be a path to citizenship? And then, Trump would say, no. Will there be a path to legal residency, meaning you are not a U.S. citizen, but you have a work permit, you're allowed to stay in the country, we're not going to deport you. And we never quite got that question, and Trump never really gets pinned down. He'll say, like, well, are you going to do this? Like, well, let me tell you about the wall. No, I'm not asking about the wall. He just kind of maneuvers, and it's like it's that old saying, like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. It just won't stick. It just there's nothing to grasp onto there. So my suspicion is that there are some days Trump feels like deporting all 11 million illegal immigrants, and there are some days he doesn't. And I think a lot of it depends on who did he just talk to. He mentions talking in that comment to Hannity, talking to very strong people, and I guess it sounds like people he respects said to him, Donald, I think you're wrong on this. And then he made him rethink it. And on the one hand, this is I suppose I say this is a good thing. This is not stubbornly refusing to see that you're wrong in anything like that. I think Jeb Bush will say, who is this person who made the exact same argument I did, who Trump now finds so persuasive? If he talks to Bannon or if he talks to someone else, he might end up being back on the perspective of wanting to deport everyone. And this is not a persona that is reassuring to have in the Oval Office, because it basically sounds like he hasn't really thought it through. He doesn't really think what is most important to him. And that depending on who's advising him on any given day, they can be the ones who ultimately end up kind of making the decision by weighing in so heavily on his thinking.
So many thoughts here, Jim. First of all, Jeb Bush, please clap, because Donald Trump agrees with you now. Secondly, I can't wait for the next Hannity town hall, because last night, it was cheer now if you want to kick them all out, cheer now if you want to process. Next week, it's going to have to be cheer now if maybe.
Yeah.
So that'll be a fun.
Clap with one hand for maybe.
That's right. All right, Jim, as we frequently remind our listeners, there are two dumpster fires representing the major parties on the presidential ballot this year. So let's move on to Hillary Clinton. She gave a speech in Reno, Nevada on Thursday that she claims was supposed to be about something else, but it was really a long speech accusing Donald Trump of being a racist and bringing racist elements out of the shadows and into the mainstream of conservative politics and so forth. A difficult speech in a number of ways, because she did make a couple of references that do make many conservatives cringe about Trump, how he won't denounce people and so forth. One of whom was Alex Jones, who, of course, thinks 9/11 and Oklahoma City were inside jobs and that nobody actually died at Sandy Hook because it was a false flag, of course. Then there's, of course, Breitbart.com, and Trump's new campaign CEO is Steve Bannon, the head of Breitbart News. And they have certainly gone more to the fringe, as you and I have discussed many times in the 3.5 years since the untimely death of Andrew Breitbart himself. But Hillary Clinton's justification for labeling them as a fringe organization is pretty baffling.
According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, which tracks hate groups, Breitbart embraces ideas on the extremist fringe of the conservative right.
Well, Jim, if the Southern Poverty Law Center says it, it must be so, because every conservative group is a radical extremist organization, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. And then Hillary Clinton also pointed out that Donald Trump was a big birther 4 years ago, which he was.
And let's not forget that Trump first gained political prominence leading the charge for the so-called birthers. He promoted the racist lie that President Obama is not really an American citizen, part of a sustained effort to delegitimize America's first black president.
Oh, but did Donald Trump actually start all the birther rumors? No. This is from the UK Telegraph. It was not until April 2008, at the height of the intensely bitter Democratic presidential primary process, that the touch paper of this issue was properly lit. An anonymous email circulated by supporters of Mrs. Clinton, Mr. Obama's main rival for the party's nomination, thrust a new allegation into the national spotlight that he had not been born in Hawaii. Quote, Barack Obama's mother was living in Kenya with his Arab African father late in her pregnancy, unquote. It said she was not allowed to travel by plane then, so Barack Obama was born there, and his mother then took him to Hawaii to register his birth, unquote. So, Jim, a lot of associations that Donald Trump has that we're not exactly excited about. Hillary Clinton, the worst possible person to be making these allegations.
There's a lot to unpack here, Greg. And one thing I'm just going to observe, that if you really think that the alt-right is a major and growing menace in this country, and you feel that extremist fringe has effectively taken over the Republican Party, if you feel like they're stirring up hatred and potentially leading to, if you really believe all that, and I think there's a pretty plausible case that can be made of all that, the absolute worst person possible to make this argument is Hillary Clinton. And I'm not saying out of hypocrisy, although I think we certainly can, and you pointed out to a bunch of cases where, so really it's bad to hang out with extremists, right? Bernadette Dorn and William Ayers, they don't count as extremists anymore.
Apparently not.
Right? They only tried to blow up the Pentagon, But even beyond that, look, Hillary Clinton is the Democratic nominee. There are a lot of people who are vehemently opposed to the Democratic nominee and who want more than anything else, who can't let Hillary Clinton become. So if she comes out and says, the people who are opposed to me are the alt-right, Well, a lot of people are going to say, well, I guess I'm alt-right. Like this is the spotlighting them and portraying them as vehemently opposed to her is probably the one of the best sales pitches she could possibly make for them. The leaders of the alt-right were not dreading yesterday's speech by Hillary Clinton. They were thrilled about it. They were celebrating. They loved this was their coming out party, right? Everybody in the country was going to know about who they were, and this was going to boost their message and give them a platform like they'd never seen. Now, Hillary would say, look, I'm denouncing them the whole time. Yeah, but Hillary, there are a lot of people who don't like you. Now, the other thing she's doing in this, she did point out things like Paul Ryan criticizing Trump for his comment on the judge and things like that. She didn't quite say, oh, all Republicans are like this. But she certainly didn't exactly spend a great deal of time making distinctions between non-racist Republicans and all that stuff. And the other reason I think that the argument against the alt-right and the idea of this racist white nationalist movement that is very enthusiastic about Trump and has, reared its ugly head in our country in this past election cycle, Greg, is that we've heard this argument before over people who I think are pretty indisputably not racist, right? Mitt Romney got the exact same thing. John McCain got the same thing. Sarah Palin. Every Republican has had that Republican is racist charge thrown at them going back for generations. And so to hear Hillary come out and say, no, this time we really mean it. It's like the boy who cried wolf. The word racist has lost a great deal of its power because it gets thrown around so casually, so easily. Do you remember, Greg, when making fun of Obama playing golf all the time was racist?
Oh, sure.
I remember there was a National Review cover about Obama and how little of his background had been explored and how little of his years in Chicago. And then the headline, the word they had on the cover was Enigma. And somebody wrote, they only put that word because they couldn't put the other word on there, right? I mean, there are so many knee-jerk cheap shots of accusations of racism that when you actually see genuine racism, I don't think there's any dispute that David Duke is racist, right? Does anybody want to say, no, he's just misconstrued? No, this man is a flat-out Klan racist. And the fact that but you've heard it so much, and you've heard it the word has no meaning anymore, so that no one gets particularly upset by this. So I don't know if it's going to be that effective for Hillary Clinton anymore. I don't think it's going to change the numbers very much. I don't think it will do much good. In fact, if anything, it might actually strengthen the repugnant elements of that movement. But I also kind of have this nagging fear that, for the Democrats, this makes sense. If you can make your opponent look like a nutjob Klan member, you do it, and you totally forget the existence of Robert Byrd.
Her mentor.
You hear people say, oh, every time there's a racial controversy, Republicans bring up Robert Byrd. Let's just observe. It's not just like, oh, this was a youthful dalliance with it. He was one of the leaders. I believe he was a Grand Drake. He was a recruiter for this group, right? And then he jumps into politics. And as you see, as I mentioned, that word on the National Review cover or other much more minor actions get denounced as racist. But you can be a leader in the Klan, and as long as you renounce it and put a D after your name, nobody in the Democratic Party or most of the national media is going to give you that much grief about it. And Byrd, by the way, later on did use the N-word on a Sunday show. And everyone kind of was like, oh, that's just Byrd being Byrd, And it was just kind of, there's a really glaring double standard on this. And I think what's bad about that is that people are now so cynical about accusations of racism that they're not really worried when an actual, genuine, indisputable, no, this race is better than other, honestly, type racist rears their ugly head and starts getting a platform. Yay! Is the weekend here yet, Greg?
One more story, Jim. One more story, and it's a doozy. Let me tell you. We've spent so much time saying so many positive things about young people in recent weeks and months, with their safe spaces and their rooms with soft pillows and bubbles and videos of puppies in case they hear an opinion that they don't like, trigger warnings being in place on a lot of college campuses. Well, good news. This story isn't about the campus. This story is about the insanity of people usually at an age after they've been in college, but it kind of tells you where our culture is headed, not only here but in Europe as well. This is from the UK Spectator. As far as the bride was concerned, the wedding was perfect. Her dress was beautiful, the vows were traditional, and she changed her name after the ceremony. The clifftop scenery was breathtaking. The 7 bridesmaids were encouraging and supportive. Move over, Princess Di. There was only one thing missing: the groom. Like a growing number of single women, Sarah Starkstrom had decided to marry herself. Quote, I thought about people marrying other people without loving themselves first, she says, explaining what many would call a bizarre overreaction to finding herself single at the age of 29. Quote, how could they pledge to do all this stuff for another person when they couldn't promise themselves the same thing. I decided to marry myself to celebrate my independence and strength. I did it to promise to be my own best friend. So every year on the 9th of September, I have to honor my vows, and I really try to live up to the promises that I made. But while all this may sound mad, narcissistic, or completely pointless, self-marriage is one way to embrace the reality in which ever-increasing numbers of women find themselves wanting to settle down, have children, and make a lifelong commitment, but being short of a man to do it with. Today, there are more single people than at any previous time in history, especially in large cities. This trend apparently started with an artist in the Netherlands in 2003. And it's still very much fringe, of course, but that event generated a lot of publicity and seems to have started a baffling trend. Since 2003, there have been multiple reports of single women marrying themselves in the UK, as well as Australia, Canada, the Netherlands, Taiwan, and the USA. Jim, I feel so old when I read stories like this. The culture is just completely spinning out of control.
Some single folks out there might say, oh, sure, very easy for you, for Jim, for you and Greg to kind of scoff at this sort of thing. Both of you are married, have been for a while, and pretty obviously we both married up.
Yes.
But in life, here's the thing. Two questions that kind of come out of hearing what you're describing there, Greg. One, do you get the feeling that artist who in Europe who started this, it started out as oh yeah, well, if you're so great, why don't you just marry yourself? And the light bulb goes off. Maybe I will. And then the second thing is, so once you've married yourself, Greg, what happens if you find a special someone? Do you sleep with them? Is that cheating? Do you have to ever tell yourself, I've fallen in love with someone who isn't you? Do you have to divorce yourself?
All good legal questions.
I'm sure right now that do you have to divorce yourself? And there are psychotherapists and lawyers who are like, there's a lot of money to be made in this. So it's basically, I'm glad this is a fringe concept. The sort of thing where I'd like to hope that, you're, about like 29 and you're giving up on your chances of finding someone. That seems kind of surprising. But anyway, you know what? I've come to the conclusion. I know what I need to do with my life. I'm going to hold a wedding and I'm going to marry myself. Where are your friends to say, what's wrong with you? Right. Or I think you need to lie down. The summer heat seems to be getting to you or something like that. Or go home, you're drunk or something. Something to make you say, no, this is not really what you want to do. And then, like, Greg, if you got an invitation to a friend or coworker's self-marriage, do you spend half of what you usually would on a regular wedding gift? Do you dress formal, right? When they, I assume they're not doing these in churches, but which side would you sit on? The groom or the bride? Do you throw a bouquet and does anybody want to catch it? I mean, there's so many things about a wedding that don't fit when it's an act of self-love like that it's kind of left bizarre. Greg, I don't know about you. A couple of years ago, I had friends who got married on my birthday. So instead of getting to do things I like on my birthday, I had to go out. Was out in it's early July. It's the middle of somewhere on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. It's really nice. It's an unbelievably hot day. I got to put on a suit. Change in the suit right close to where the wedding is being held, and I forgot a belt. So now I'm walking around without a belt, and I look like I'm trying to hoist my pants up. I had a really miserable time. You know the very worst part of that, Greg?
What?
Within a couple of years, they got divorced, and I'm like, darn it! I had to spend my birthday out there. At the very least, you guys could try to make it work and stick together and all that stuff. So, it's really unfortunate in all the troubles and problems facing modern marriages, Greg, that people don't think more about their wedding guests and what they gave up for that day. So.
Amazing.
Isn't narcissism terrible, Greg? Anyway, that's your closing thought for the weekend, folks.
Oh, Jim, I'm sure there is a more serious discussion we should be having at some point about the devaluation of marriage and why people are putting it off for so long. But I hear there's a great book out there about the value of making the discovery of a good husband or wife a priority in your life at a relatively early age. I hear it's called Heavy Lifting. Isn't that one of the main themes of that book?
That is a fantastic one, and I feel so glad that I didn't have to plug it, Greg. Thank you for my denunciation of narcissism and then saying, oh, by the way, buy my book.
We've gone mad this week. Jim, talk to you on Monday.
See you Monday, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Columbus of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to tune in again on Monday for the next 3 Martini Lunch. Have a great weekend, everyone.